This is Work That Matters. I'm your host, Sean Murphy. We spend half our lives working. Shouldn't it be a greater source of optimism, joy, and meaning in our lives? Join us as we explore what leaders can do to help employees do work that matters. Happy holidays. This is Sean Murphy with Work That Matters. Just want to give you a quick program note. We are on a slightly alternative release schedule given the holidays. So we have an episode that's coming out today, and then we also have two episodes coming out January 2nd and 3rd. So that's Thursday and Friday. Our typical release schedule are Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we'll resume those the week of January 6th. So just wanted to make sure you knew that you're getting all your Work That Matters in an appropriate time frame. Take care. In today's episode, we speak with leader in the trenches, inspirer, and educator, Deb Mills-Scofield. Together, we explore freedom, a missing element in many organizations today. And Deb shares a perspective about millennials I think we can all relate to. Get ready to take notes. More great wisdom coming your way. Welcome to another edition of Work That Matters. Hello, I am your host, Sean Murphy. My guest today is Deb Mills-Scofield. Now, Deb is one of the most dynamic people that I have met in person. She's a bundle of energy, and that comes through on the screen when you interact with her online. In fact, Huffington Post just listed Deb as one of the 100 must-follow people on Twitter for 2014. That's pretty prestigious there, Deb.
It is, indeed.
Yes. Deb is also an author, a blogger, a consultant, a VC, an entrepreneur, a mentor, a coach, a connector, and I'll add one more adjective in there, a beautiful human being. You can find her writing on Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Innovation Excellence, on our very own Switch and Shift, and you can also find her writing on her own blog, Mills-Scofield.com. If that isn't enough, she's working on a book, which we're going to have you elaborate on in just a second here, Deb. So tell me, those were the highlights. What gaps would you add from my intro?
I am also a wife and a mom of two teenage kids who are incredible.
And here's one of the things that I really admire about you is when I met you in person in Rhode Island this summer, you are surrounded by youth, and you're like Mama Deb to them or something. You just they just relate to you so well. I mean, they just look up to you, but your interactions with them it's quite delightful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. They are. Well, they're just amazing, amazing kids, and I am joyfully addicted to working with them and being with them, and I don't plan to get over that addiction. I figure it's pretty safe.
I think so. If when you consider all the addictions, if it's hanging around kids, not such a bad one.
Not such a bad one.
Now, tell us a little bit about this book you're working on.
Well, I had been approached about doing a book about my networking and innovation, and while many people out there are writing really neat books, I'm just not built to do yet another typical business book. I think we have a lot that are out there that probably could have been blog posts instead of books. And so I want to, and I'm starting to create a book that's not going to be a normal size or shape with a lot of color that you can read forwards, backwards, start in the middle, go to the end. You can just read in any way, shape, or form you want, and share that. But no matter where you go to, it'll have meaning for you that day.
Perfect.
So that's about all I know at this point. I just want to do something really different and weird that could be physical, maybe an app, maybe an ebook, who knows?
Well, the nice thing is publishing, although mostly an outdated industry, right? And as a writer and working to get my first book out there, hopefully I'm not shooting myself in the foot by saying that, but there are some advances in the publishing industry that makes some of what you're talking about a little bit more possible than what it might have been. So,
Oh, definitely.
we are eager to see what your book is about.
Me too.
Well, let's get started here. So, Work That Matters is a podcast that centers, the mission is humanize the workplace. And so the kind of the slant of this interview is really around how do we find meaning? How do we find purpose? How do we get the most out of the time that we invest in our work so that it is a contribution to our own lives as well as to those that we're working with? So we'll explore that in many different ways as we go through the interview. But what I want to start off with is a quote from your book, or actually from a post that you wrote that was recently on Harvard Business Review called "Control is for Beginners," which is probably, I love that saying. It's so many different ways you can interpret that. Here's a quote from your post. "When we don't give our people the space to take calculated risks, learn, apply, and iterate, we are really risking our future. While there is a risk to improvising and spontaneity, control begins in its own insidious dangers. In our push for perfection, we over-engineer." So talk a little bit about why is control for beginners?
Well, the quote actually comes from Carl Stormer, who was one of my Biff Storyteller colleagues, from Carl's wife after her stroke at the age of, I think it was 43. One of the things I learned early on as a parent, but not when I managed people, so it was kind of the wrong order in some ways, was that I think the only time I had control over my children was when I was pregnant with them. After that, and even then, not much. So control is for beginners because we think naively we can control things. And so we try to then control things, which puts constraints, sometimes real, sometimes artificial, on ourselves and on our people. And I think in general, my own experience in my life has been that when I try to control things, the risks are much higher, and the risk of failure, the risk of it not working out, the risk of alienating, rather than when I just kind of let things go with some guidelines.
Yeah.
Not like, you're going to brainstorm about, I'm going to become the biggest tennis star of the world, because that's just not going to happen. But when you start letting go and freeing yourself up and your people up, it is amazing what can happen. And earlier this year, I was honored to do a radio show with Trust Across America with John Hagel, my icon, Saul Kaplan, a very dear, wonderful friend who runs Biff, and one of the most amazing leaders I've ever met, who I'm blessed to have as a client, Mike Waite, on the paradox of leadership and vulnerability. And that's where when you start ceding control and making yourself vulnerable, it lets people open up and share. You're willing to maybe come up with a weirder idea because you're not worried about being judged as much as getting it out there and validating it.
So what comes to mind is a kind of a poetic way of describing what you're saying, that there's great wisdom found in the pause, right? If you pause for a moment, you will find and see things that you couldn't see before, because we're in, I think when we're trying to control something, we have an outcome that we are trying to get to, rather than saying, okay, we've got this task and we know that we have to be able to, maybe it's create a new product line that we haven't launched, that we've never created before for a new market. A controlling approach would be, I know what we need to do, so therefore I'm going to control the situation so that we can get to that, as opposed to let's pause long enough to see what's possible, what's emerging, and then let's go from there. Is that an accurate statement, or am I off?
No, I think that's really spot on, because what I see is when you're trying to control versus discover, when you control, you usually, not always, usually presuppose and impose a solution.
Right.
which generally then won't work because you didn't spend your time understanding the customer's needs, their culture, their forces, etc. Versus when you discover, which means you're actually going to admit you don't know, which is a way of saying I can't control it. Then you might, wow, actually discover a solution that fits for that client or customer's culture, behavior, surroundings, so that they can, with you, come up with a solution that they can maintain, support, and develop that'll work.
Yeah. I would venture to say that the competitive advantage for a business is to those who can actually pause long enough to let go of the control, to be able to explore, find, uncover solutions that meet their business needs.
That's part of why I love music as an analogy. I mean, music is a language. There's all the data that shows how it affects our brain in so many positive ways. But one of the things, and this has come out through the discussions Carl and I have as we work through trying to do a post for Switch and Shift.
Yay!
Part of jazz in particular, and also classical, is there pauses in the music.
Yeah.
To kind of give you time. There's also that, I'll pick on jazz because I'm thinking of Carl. If you have jazz continuous with no pauses, you like run out of breath. You want to go, I need to breathe, stop.
Yeah.
And it's the pauses that allow you time to reflect, to give feedback, to discuss. Pausing is really important, and it's important for efficacy. For efficiency, but it's not effective. And since we valued efficiency over effectiveness, we got away with all the pauses. And I just messed up all my EFF words.
I think we're tracking with you though. But I would actually say that it is efficient to pause because
Yes.
it does allow for you to see, I'm kind of stuck in this poetic way of looking at what we're talking about here. But it allows for you to see the wisdom in the moment, what's possible, what's emerging, what are we overlooking, which might be less poetic from a business perspective, that in this world today with as much input that we get from external forces, social, technology, the economy, politics, that it's so dynamic, we can't, if we take a controlling approach, we're going to overlook some really important details.
Well, and I think that's one of the big delusions
Good word.
of the 20th century, right? That given the pressure and the importance of efficiency over effectiveness, so many times we really weren't efficient, or we were being efficient at being ineffective, because so much stuff didn't really work or had to be redone. So then by definition, were you really efficient?
Right. And the delusion is propagated by the fact that you might not know months, years down the road that your lack of pausing or your need for control led to problems that you now have to deal with that could have been mitigated or reduced or completely avoided had we stopped long enough, paused, recognize that we don't need to control this. We need to be able to see what do we need to do with what we're being asked to do.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and for those of us who don't know Biff is not some surfer in Southern California. Biff stands for Business Innovation Factory, which I always say is the sister to TED. Is that true? It sounds good.
This is how I define it, which is going to tick off an awful lot of people, but that's what would I do if I didn't do that, right?
Hey.
I basically view Biff as a humble, intimate version of TED. So it's smaller.
Right.
And even though it's grown significantly through the years, it's more like a gathering. Somehow the Biff team is able to keep that intimate setting and ambiance. And it's humble because while many people that speak at Biff have spoken at TED or will go on to speak at TED, there's a sense of being peers and not superiority that, frankly, I do see with a lot of people that speak at TED and the TED ambiance.
Yeah.
Of the 0.01%. There are an awful lot of people at BIF that that get up there and tell stories that aren't in the 0.01%.
And if you've never been to BIF, it is, I went this year, and what I loved about BIF, so the whole focus is on innovation, and you can riff on the topic of innovation many different ways. And when you go to BIF, you'll see that innovation's interpretation it's very exciting, right? Whether it be social innovation, whether it be product innovation, whether it be, self-innovation. It's really a fascinating look at innovation. But I think what really struck me is everybody's so friendly there. People will just approach you and talk to you. And
right.
I love that. All right, so let me switch gears here. So one of the things that I wanted to get your perspective on, because you do see through your role as a VC at Glengarry, through the work you do at Brown University and working with the youth, I've got two questions here that are kind of forward-looking. And one is, when you look at our organizations today, what do you think is missing in them? I think you have a unique perspective through your work that I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Freedom. So I think there is still some strong sense of control. I'm very blessed to have clients that aren't as into control as others. But what I see is there needs to be more and more messiness. Lateral thinking is an overused term, but the world is not linear. And so that's what I mean by we need more freedom to explore. You still need to vet ideas. I mean, explore doesn't mean everything. You still need to have a sense of purpose and meaning that you're trying to achieve. And then what are the best ways to achieve that? So there's a context. And give people the freedom and the space to make, like I said, calculated risks.
Yeah.
So as a VC, one of the things we really want is when we're looking at an investment, we know that there is nothing that is without risk. But we would rather not be surprised by a risk we didn't anticipate or think would happen. So that's why I say calculated. We want to be aware of all the potential risks, and then we'll make a decision. We don't want to get blindsided by a risk.
Sure.
And I think a lot of this comes from, I grew up in a very take a risk kind of home intellectually. So coloring outside the lines, for lack of a better cliche, was pretty much embraced. I then go to Brown, where it's all coloring outside the lines. And then I go to Bell Labs, where there's more coloring outside the lines. And I had management that always encouraged that kind of thing. So that's all I really know.
Yeah.
And when I look at the bosses I had who really were more mentors than bosses, they very early on, and I wrote about this on HBR because it was just really powerful to me about the bosses that I had. They really gave me tremendous freedom to define my own job, to go with what I thought, and they would take none of the credit and pick up all the blame. So they'd give me a long enough leash to go and explore, but not long enough to choke myself.
Long enough to feel some of the pain, but not totally, like you said.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So what's interesting about what you're talking about, and I'm going to connect two different elements from our conversation so far. So control, risk, and freedom, right? That's the theme so far. And what's fascinating to me is that really those three things don't seem to fit together, but they do in a way. So how do they all work together?
Well, I think the only thing that I can really ever control is how I react to things. And by the way I react to circumstances, I model that behavior for other people. So I think of this very much as a parent, right? My kids see me and my husband, and we are role models for good or bad for how you react and deal and accept life, which has been part of then how we define our careers, because I want them, a boy and a girl, to each think of the world in certain ways. So that's control, is that I can control how I react. I cannot control how you behave, but by how I react, I might be able to influence that.
Right.
And I might be able to help you understand the risks of certain behaviors. Some are riskier than others. And how do you define risk? So I don't think entrepreneurs are necessarily more risk-ophilic. I think they just define risk differently. To them, the risk isn't losing the mortgage in the house, maybe. It's the risk of not having pursued a passion to make a big impact in the world.
Yeah, yeah.
And then that gets to, once you identify your risk profile, it gives you the freedom to move within that, or maybe even push those boundaries out and explore.
I would think too that risk it creates that necessary tension between you letting freedom run. This is going to sound almost controlling here, and I don't mean it this way. Freedom in itself can go too far, right? It can become ineffective. It can actually not yield the results, because at the end of the day, this is a business, and a business needs to create some type of result that is beneficial to the organization, to the employees, and or the customers. But
right.
That risk and freedom is like a natural tension that keep each other in check, so to speak.
Well, and that's where I think it's really important, but not traditional in business to, and this doesn't spell a good acronym, but it is my adage: experiment, learn, apply, iterate. And what is it? Peter Sims wrote the book, Take Small Bets, or whatever that is. When I look at my clients that have really succeeded and grown their companies, and I'll point to Mike Wade at Menasha Packaging as one of those, where they have almost tripled the business in the 8 years I've worked with them.
Wow.
So, but one of the things they're really good at is trying small experiments with ideas, learning, applying that learning, and iterating. So one of their little experiments from 8 years ago is part of the reason they tripled revenue in 8 years.
Yeah.
And so it's that they knew what the risks were. They mitigated what they could. You have to understand what's risky or what's not. And this is everyone talks about opportunity costs.
Yeah.
Oh, well, the opportunity cost. Well, there's an opportunity cost of not innovating that people generally don't look at.
Very good point. Very good
right?
point.
So, and it's like my thing with sunk costs. They're sunk already. Move on, get over it.
Right.
But there's an opportunity cost. There's a cost to not innovating, which is very hard to quantify. And it's those that are willing to take the risk of that understand and move forward.
Yeah. Well, it's in this very complex business environment, that innovation, that willingness to take the risk, the freedom that you're talking about, which is a trend, a word that I see popping up more and more as we look at what does the organization need to look like in the 21st century. Freedom is a characteristic that I'm seeing and hearing talked more about, which is very encouraging to me, because this notion of control, because you've basically given the opposite of which is the freedom. It is the opportunity cost for not having freedom need to also be evaluated.
Oh my gosh. And so I was talking to, I forget who, a potential client. That's who it was. And they don't allow their people access to Facebook or Twitter, any of that stuff. To which my first reaction was, what? Like, they don't have smartphones? They can't be doing this anyway? And, their concern was that, well, they're going to waste their time on that. And I said, guys, if you think they're going to waste their time on that, they're already wasting their time on something else.
Right.
Instead. And you have a deeper problem. That's a symptom. If your people aren't, and there are times everyone's not passionately engaged,
Sure.
but if for the most part this is a problem, then the problem isn't the people. The problem is you, the leadership. So, there are these stages I call of illusion, delusion, and self-delusion. And self-delusion is the most dangerous.
Yes.
But, you guys are self-deluded if you think that the problem's with them and not you.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, I'm sure that was perhaps some hard realities to face, because that is a common resistant response is, well, they're going to waste their time. Yeah, most people don't spend hours and hours on Twitter, at any stretch of moment in time. Well, hey, let's transition here, because the other part that I'd like to get your perspective on are the millennials. You work real closely with the future leaders of our businesses. When I met you in Rhode Island, you had a bunch of your students who, and this is what I tell people, if I were that effective or that, not effective, but productive at their age, I felt kind of like a slacker, but in a good way, because some of these kids have already started their own business, and they're barely 20, 21. So what excites you about what millennials bring to the business world?
What excites me is a couple things. And I'm not sure that they're bringing stuff to the business world that we all have felt for a while, or felt at all, but just weren't allowed to discuss or didn't think we had the option to. So I've been very blessed in never having my work seem like work. My work has always been something I'm passionate about.
Yeah.
But I think that's unusual. These kids, that's what they want. And I think that's what every human being wants. And in fact, I'm going to sidetrack for a minute.
Okay.
Tanvir Nassir just had a blog post up about some studies that have been done about millennials versus boomers, Gen Ys, whatever, Xers, whatever the generations are, and that there isn't a lot of difference. It's just we weren't allowed to discuss it. So what I see is that they are going to push that agenda more to the forefront than it has been, and the rest of us are going to benefit from that because we didn't have the guts or whatever to speak up and say, or know it was an option to have meaning and purpose be part of work. What I love about these kids and what excites me for our future is the way they look at business models. They don't do we've always done it this way, because they don't know that yet. And part of it is, I have to be honest, not to sound whatever about this, but Brown is, you're pretty much self-selecting if you go to Brown. You're a different type of person, little bucking the trend. And then I probably deal with ones that are bucking it more. So they feel entitled to make a difference in the world, not to be given stuff, but to make a difference. And I think they are going to bring a level of creativity and innovation in collaborative business models. So the way we go to business, the way we partner, the way we collaborate. But also I see them bringing, at least the ones I work with, much more of a back to control versus freedom, a rush to understand versus a rush to solve. So before they go in presupposing solutions, they all have ideas of what they think the solution should be. But there's a real sense of let's understand the customer, the needs, the forces acting upon them, be they a social venture or a regular venture, before they go design a solution. They're much more of that experiment, learn, apply, iterate. And I think they will bring a new perspective of real customer needs rather than shareholder needs, which is very important.
Well, they characteristically are really interested in corporate social responsibility. What role does a corporation play in society? And it's not just to create profits for their shareholders, but it's to serve a bigger purpose. And from what the research I've read, that is a little bit unique to them. And maybe what you're saying is that has probably been around for a long time. It's just now being okay to say it because there's a group who is saying it out loud.
Right.
And they're not just saying it, they're using their feet. They're going to those organizations or going out on their own, or they're leaving an organization that doesn't resonate with meaning and purpose in the context of business.
One of the things I really appreciate is, and this has been a bugaboo of mine, this concept of output versus outcome. So we have, as a society, measured output, revenue and profit.
Yeah.
Right? Or money and profit, instead of outcome, which is meaning and purpose. And I would submit that if you do not, as a corporation for profit, consistently provide meaning and purpose for your customers, you don't need to worry about money and profit. It's Darwinian. And it might take you a while. It might take you 20 years to die as a corporation. And that's where I see, and I love, the big difference is that these are not kids that are anti-capitalistic. They have no problem making money
right.
and making meaning. It's that and. It's not the either or. And so to some degree, while they'll start things and they'll fail, I think their perspective is better on consistently delivering real value to the customer rather than the shareholders.
Yes. Yeah.
And my friend Steve Denning, who's been on this for a while, our problem has been the focus on shareholder value. Because if the customers aren't happy, nobody else will be.
Right. Right. Shareholders will certainly be unhappy because then the profits aren't coming in or the revenues aren't coming in. Yeah. Yeah. So two quotes that I love: rush to understand versus rush to solve. I can't begin to tell you the number of conversations I have with clients around what one client calls problem idolatry. Let me idolize the problem as opposed to help find a solution. And I think what you're saying here is, well, to find the solution, you first have to understand. And
right.
I liken that to a doctor, right? I go in with a headache. The doctor's not going to go, oh my gosh, you've got cancer. We need to start chemo. They're going to want to understand what's going on. And I think that model, though as cliche as it is very relevant in business today, that we've got to look at the business problems because some of these problems are wicked. There is no right solution, but it is to understand what is the solution that is going to hopefully give us some longevity so that we don't have this problem coming up again, or that we mitigate or neutralize it. The other one go ahead.
The other thing is sometimes what we think is a problem isn't really a problem for the other person. They have no, and I think of this in a lot of social entrepreneurship stuff. Oh, it's a big problem to us. Well, maybe to that culture and those people, they don't see it as a problem. So who the heck are we to say it is?
Good point. That's going to be interesting as social entrepreneurship grows. Is, are we really addressing the right problems?
Exactly.
Yeah. So we've been talking.
Your other point that I interrupted you on. I
love this output versus outcome. At Swish and Shift, we are all about the outcome. Really, we want to create. We advocate that it's not profit first. That if you put people first, you put purpose first, you're going to get the profit, right? So it's just switching the focus, and that's very foreign for a lot of us who grew up in the 20th century. That a lot of our business management practices came from the 19th century that haven't really been tested. And now here we are saying, wait a minute, you can't just replace somebody because they're a cog in the machinery, quote unquote. These people actually have the knowledge you need to be able to solve your problems. And you can't just replace them willy-nilly because it ain't that simple today.
What I think it gets to is people, depends which way you look at it, right?
Yeah.
Profit and sales are lagging indicators.
Right. Now,
the way I'm built, I like leading indicators because even though I'm all about innovation and all this stuff, I hate being surprised. So I always look for leading indicators. Now, one could say to a degree, your culture and the way you treat your people is a lagging indicator. And it can be, but it's also a leading indicator.
Absolutely.
So I think of it as in a factory, if you're not putting the right talent and you're not treating them the right way into, this is such a 20th, 19th century, but into the pipeline for the factory.
Right.
Why are you surprised when good stuff doesn't come out the other end? Right? So if you want to look at real leading indicators for the health of a company, it has to be people.
Yep.
But they're not easy to measure and quantify until we turn them into cogs in a wheel with all the Deming quality stuff, et cetera, and make them efficient. But human beings are not efficient and they're not predictable, and it drives management nuts.
Yep. Well, it is definitely a 21st century reality. There have been thought leaders. You've been mentioning Steve for a while. Steve and I'll throw in us at Switch and Shift. We're just jumping on a bandwagon that's been going, and we're just adding. We're another voice that's getting louder. That people come first, your profits will follow.
Right.
So to that point, I want to ask this one final question before we go to the 6 ubiquitous questions that I ask all my guests. What would you recommend to managers to add more meaning in their employees' work?
To treat their employees like adults. I mean, I really think there's a lot of stuff, but at a basic level, most companies treat their people like kids. And you generally will get the behavior you treat and incent.
Right.
If you can't trust the people you have working for you, then they shouldn't be working for you. So I think you err on the side. I think it was Hemingway that said something like, I'm not going to get the quote right, but something about what's the best way to trust someone? Trust them. And that's not all the right way that he wrote it, of course, so eloquently.
Sure. Well, he drank some whiskey while he drank some whiskey while he wrote that, so he had that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Down in, Cuba or something.
Right.
But I think fundamentally, if you just treat people like adults or the way you want to be treated, when did the golden rule become an exception?
Right.
I think it's so simple.
Well, and I think the simplicity of it might be easy to overlook, but what I would add to this is, have you even considered trusting your employees? Has it just been an assumption that's been untested that, they can't be trusted? Well, what about they can be trusted, and look at that and explore that? Because what if you could trust your employees? Yeah. And what if they've been waiting for you to do that?
Right.
Well, I think that's what I love about that. It's simple, but there's some nuances that make it a little complex that really would require a manager to do some self-introspection.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Because generally, if you have trouble trusting other people, I think part of that is you don't trust yourself, or you project how you would respond to a situation onto them and assume that's how they will respond.
That's right. I recently did an interview with 2 folks from the Great Place to Work Institute, and part of their model for determining if an organization is a great place is trust. And they have, and I'm not recalling the details right now, but they have three elements that make up trust, and it's really truly the starting point for meaning. Right? Mm-hmm. For me to find meaning in my work, I need to trust that you trust me, your intentions are good, that you are interested in my best interest, your best interest, and the organization's best interest. It's very nuanced, that word trust.
Well, and one of my favorite examples is, I'm going to pick on Mike Wade again at Menasha. So he's, the president of this now huge company. And someone that's working one of the big corrugators or presses will run into him in a grocery store in town, small town in Wisconsin, and they'll just chat. Mike knows that person. They know Mike. There's no hesitancy to go up and just say hi to Mike if you're a pressman and he's, the head of the company.
Right.
That tells you a heck of a lot.
One is that I'm relating to a person here, not just an asset or a resource, AKA employee. Mm-hmm. There's a relationship there. Well, Deb, I could continue talking for hours here. But I think we're going to end on the importance of trust and relating to your employees as people, and move into the 6 ubiquitous questions. I just like saying that, 6 ubiquitous questions. It's a fun word, that word ubiquitous. So the first question is, so what inspires you in life?
The ingenuity, creativity, and hope that's innate in human beings.
I like that.
I mean, just look around, you know? Even look at The Voice. Like, The Voice is such a popular TV show because we still love music.
Yeah. That's one show that I've just lately gotten into, and I've tried. I was like, oh, I can't watch another American Idol, but it's so not another American Idol.
Right.
Yeah. What's capturing your attention these days?
Everything. I am so insatiably curious and addicted to information. I think a lot of it right now is the conversations I'm having with my 16-year-old son and my 13-year-old daughter about things happening in Syria, about what they're learning in history. I mean, just these really deep conversations that make you question the assumptions you've had. And then I've got clients that are really pushing the envelope on some very cool business models, and that's a lot of fun.
That's one thing that we didn't get a chance to talk about, is your contribution to one of my favorite books was the business model canvas. Now that wasn't the name of the book though.
It's Business Model Generation.
There we go. Yes. But in that is the business model canvas, which
right.
which was used in my MBA program. And thankfully I'm done with. But we also, we're using it at Switch and Shift for our 2014 look ahead. So, nicely done on that.
Well, and that's why I turned down doing a regular business book, and I'm doing something different because Alex said he would, I forget what his words were, but at BIF last year, he threatened me that if I created a typical business book, he would out me in the world or something. I don't know what it was. So I can't do that because I can't have Alex outing me as, status quo.
Yeah, well, no, that would that doesn't suit you, the status quo.
Yeah, no, it doesn't.
Not so much. What book has had a major influence on the way you think?
The Bible.
Say more.
Personally and professionally. Personally, because I am a Jew who believes. And so it's just a source of wisdom and all that stuff. And professionally, because there's so many great examples, like, could Pharaoh really had pulled off enslaving all the Jews if Joseph hadn't gone about centralizing all control out of the rural areas and into the central government? So there's a lot of examples in there that I think are just fascinating from a business world too.
Yeah. I often think of the message in Psalms around anger and words, because I'm a pretty passionate person, and passion is a good thing, but crossing the line, it could work against you. But
fortunately, God doesn't have to take the advice we give him.
Indeed. So what song are you listening to repeatedly these days?
I am listening to a lot of Carl Stormer's music.
Stuff, by the way. Great stuff.
Yeah. And then my daughter's voice teacher, Kim Nazarian, is one of the co-founders of the New York Voices, 2-time Grammy Award Jazz Quartet, up for another one. So I'm listening to a lot of their Christmas music right now, too.
Well, I have to say Jazz Code, which Carl Stormer is a part of, his Christmas CD.
Yeah, isn't it cool?
Really good. Yes, very good. Morning or evening person?
Afternoon.
Well, yeah, you could not definitely go with either one, right? You had to buck the system here. Afternoon, okay.
Right, right before the bus is ready to come, I am in the groove. No, I'm probably more afternoon, evening. I've become morning because I had to as a mom getting the kids up and stuff.
Yeah.
But it is true. The afternoon, most people's dead time, like right around 1:30, I am like on a groove till 6, if I can be.
That's rare because most of us want to take a nap at that time.
Right.
All right. So for a little more serious question here, what does doing work that matters mean to you?
Life. I have been very blessed in always being able to do work that matters, which is unusual. I think most of us don't have that opportunity, and socioeconomically, most of this country doesn't. Now, you could say, well, you could always look at it a certain way to make it matter, and that's true.
Yeah.
I think it is one of the ultimate gifts you can have in life is to do something that you are passionate about, you are great at, and makes a difference in other people and can be a role model to your family as well.
Yeah. Well,
and I'm just incredibly blessed.
And you've done some really great work in your career. You have had some great successes when you were at Bell Labs. So it's definitely meaningful work that matters. You've pursued it, and you are the embodiment of why this podcast exists, because I believe that people can have work that matters no matter what they're doing, whether they're flipping burgers or they are innovating new products, right? I think it's a mindset. And,
yes, definitely.
And my hope is that this, bringing people like you onto the show, helps those who either don't have it or have it and want to keep it and want to inspire it in others, that they pick up some nuggets to go, I like what that Deb is saying. I'm going to try that on.
Well, they can always ask.
That's right. That's right.
Because the worst answer you could get is no.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And no is not as painful as it seems.
Right. It's better than a maybe.
That's right. Or no response at all. So, Deb, thank you so much for being on the show. How would you like people to connect with you?
They can find me on Twitter and send me a message, connect with me there. And what am I? I'm at D-Scofield, D-S. Are you going to have all this up so I don't have to spell it with the podcast?
We'll have it in the show notes, yeah.
Yeah, so look at the show notes, and that's how you get a hold of me. Or they can ask you, because you know how.
That's right. So we'll put in the show notes the best ways to get a hold of Deb. You definitely want to, if you are on Twitter, follow her, because you're just going to get a fascinating stream of content coming from Deb. And definitely you can read Deb here on Switch and Shift and also at Harvard Business Review. As I said at the beginning of the show, she's kind of everywhere, but in a good way, but in a really good way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. This has been wonderful. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to another episode of Work That Matters. This is Sean signing off. That does it for another episode of Work That Matters. For show notes, please visit switchandshift.com. You'll find the notes on the Work That Matters page. You know, we're a new show and we need your support. Please head on over to iTunes, leave us a 5-star rating, and leave your comments. We'll feature some of your comments in upcoming episodes. This is a Rebel Heretics production.